Tripp Watson, entrepreneur, attorney with the Watson firm. Today we're going to be talking about virtual assistants. What is a virtual assistant? A virtual assistant is anybody that works remotely who helps out your office or your personal life that does it for some kind of fee or some kind of compensation. So basically what we're going to be talking about today are the history of where VAs came from, how they came about, and we could start seeing some industry trends based upon where they've been. Then we'll start talking a little bit more about the individual types of VAs, how to select a VA, and how to use a VA to make money. The very first VA really came around with the black card from American Express. So the very first time we saw VAs was through credit cards. But what we also started to see was when companies started to offshore, we started to see more virtual assistants. You started having large manufacturing companies that would have manufacturing bases that were also overseas, and so it was very important to not only have a working base over there, but you also had the benefits of having somebody that potentially lived in India or in China who could do a bunch of the work for you. So this really became popular with, this kind of came down to the normal folks with Timothy Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. This is a book that's gone through several printings, and when it first came out, it introduced the idea of an individual having a virtual assistant. You didn't necessarily have to have a company that was a multi-million-dollar corporation that could afford a call center in Singapore and a manufacturing center in Beijing. This could literally be somebody that worked out of their house. So this is the very first time that this concept was popularized, was with Timothy Ferriss's book. So there's many different types of VAs today. Like I said, there's a lot of scalability that comes into it. But one of the very first things that we've got to decide is when you're looking at different types of VAs, you've got to define what it is that you're looking for, because there's different types of virtual assistant services. The very first thing is whether you have a dedicated or a pooled virtual assistant service. A dedicated virtual assistant is somebody that literally works with you personally. The pooled, however, is a very, very different concept. They're more task-based. They can do recurring services, but generally what happens is you initiate a task and it goes into a manager. And a manager then delegates it to an individual who specifically handles that task. The other thing to think about is whether you want a generalist or you want a specialist. And this goes back to why you want a virtual assistant in the first place. If you just need somebody to help with generalized tasks on a day-to-day basis, I need you to make this phone call, I need you to make this appointment, I need you to follow up so-and-so, so-and-so, so we get them on the calendar. A lot of these low-skill basis virtual assistants can help out because you don't need to spend a whole lot of time researching them. Having a generalist, you just basically need somebody that delivers on time. So that's one side of it. The other side is you might want to have somebody that has a more specialized skill set. I am an attorney. Sometimes you might want to have a paralegal that specifically knows what's expected of this type of pleading, this type of filing. If you are a graphic designer, you're going to want to have somebody that has graphic design experience. If you are a web developer, you're probably going to want somebody that has specialized HTML experience. You're not guaranteed that with a generalist. However, individuals versus corporate. This is a big question that pops up, is whether or not I should work with a company or whether I should work with an individual virtual assistant. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. If you work with an individual, typically you will know that particular person. They'll learn to work with you pretty well. Corporate situations can end up being not very personalized. They may not learn how you work. They may not get used to you. You may be a low man on the totem pole. The final thing to think about is local versus international. Many people don't think about this on the front end. They default to go to India or Singapore or even Costa Rica. There's a lot of companies that are based out of Costa Rica. The problem with going international is there's going to be a language barrier. You're going to have to spend a little bit more time. Most of these people are very fluent English speakers. Don't get me wrong. They are very fluent English speakers. but they are going to have an accent. We're in Birmingham, Alabama. They're very clearly not going to sound like they're from Birmingham, Alabama. How to select a virtual assistant. This is one of the most difficult things that I see people facing is selecting a virtual assistant. Now, I received a email from a friend of mine not too long ago. He said, I've got a virtual assistant. I did this, and we did stuff for about a week, and it just did not work out for me. And I said, okay, well, walk me through the process of how you hired this person. And they said, well, I didn't. I just found somebody that I liked, and I signed up with them. And that's the problem. Basic management principles don't go out the window just because you're working with somebody that's a virtual assistant. Just because they're not in the office doesn't mean that they don't need to be managed. I'm going to give you a very generalized process today in order to select a VA just to help you out. But the very first thing is decide what you need your virtual assistant to do. You're not looking for what's the best. You're not looking for what might look the best. You're not looking for any of those qualitative things. What is this person going to be doing on a day-to-day basis? Make sure it's very clear what you expect your VA to do, because if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, nobody's going to be happy at the end of the day. Because you have to define the scope and develop your test. So for instance, if you are expecting your virtual assistant to answer your phones, you probably don't want to test them on their ability to enter a spreadsheet correctly, do data entry. That doesn't help anybody. So define the scope. When you're selecting it, once you figure out what they're going to do, actually set up what they should be expected to do on a day-to-day basis. So for instance, if you need somebody to answer the phones for your company, I need somebody that's available between the hours of 9 to 5. I need you to be able to answer the phone courteously and direct it to the department that it needs to go to. Very clear, defined scope. When you ultimately set up the test, this is going to be how you test them. Now, most virtual assistants have a trial period. This is either a discounted or free trial period in which you can come in and most of these VAs have no obligation, no continuing obligation. It's a month-to-month agreement. You fire them at any time. But most of them have a trial period, which for no cost, you can come in and just say, hey, I want to try this out. I'm not sure this is a service I need, but I want to see what's going on. So what you do is after you define the scope and you've developed your test, then you actually put them through the trial period. So for instance, we've got a 30-day period. I'm going to have some secret shoppers who are basically some friends of mine call my business between the hours of 9 to 5, see how quickly these guys pick up the phone, how nice they are, and how quickly and efficiently they direct people to different departments. We'll record those and we'll figure out how nice they are. We're going to do this with anywhere between 3 to 5 different companies just to see how they go. You'll quickly realize that even though it's a trial period, a lot of these virtual assistants don't turn it on for the trial period. You'll quickly realize the people that don't care. Once you actually start working with them, set expectations. This is one of the biggest problems that I see in any type of management, and it gets compounded exponentially when you're working with a virtual assistant. For whatever reason, people just think that because these guys are virtual assistants full-time, that they automatically and magically know how to do all these things. They don't. They don't know what you do on a day-to-day basis. A lot of these people don't know what you do for a living. They don't know if you're a law firm. They don't know if you're graphic design. They don't know if you're a photographer. They don't know if you're a serial killer that just needs help booking flights because they're so busy killing people. They really have no context for what you're doing. They're not in. At the very beginning, set expectations. Say, listen, I'm starting up. This is what I expect from y'all on a day-to-day basis. This is priority 1. This is a secondary priority, but it's still important, but it still does not override my primary. I would also like for y'all to be able to do this, but if y'all can't do it, it's not a deal breaker. Make it very clear what your expectations are, because that will help your VAs work with you. Like I said, these are all basic management principles. If you hired somebody, you should do these exact same things, but most people just throw them out the window when they take on a virtual assistant. So management principles still apply to virtual assistants. Now, once you set expectations, give them routine reviews every 3 months. Hey, I've been working with y'all. Y'all have been doing primary 1 fantastically, but you're slacking on the secondary priority. Be honest with them. They take feedback incredibly well. They like to refine their processes. The good ones like to refine their processes. They like to figure out ways to make themselves better. Now, here's the big question. How do you make money using a virtual assistant? Well, there's multiple different ways, and I'll walk you through a couple of them. But the big thing is to remember is the real benefit of a virtual assistant is a lot of these people have skill sets that most people in the United States and in our areas have anyway. In a lot of these situations, they are much more qualified than somebody that we could get, even paying sometimes twice their salaries. So I'll give one example. A lot of the people that I know that work with virtual assistants are professionals. They charge by the hour. So how do you make money typically? Well, you wake up on every given morning, and in a traditional situation, your hourly rate is going to be determined by how much time you actually spend working. So this is not scientific, but this is based on scientific research. You walk in at 8 o'clock in the morning, you answer a couple of emails, you get a cup of coffee, and then on any given time, you're probably working about 50% of that hour. You really kick it up at 9 o'clock and you're killing it. Most people are incredibly productive in the mornings, and so you taper off just slightly by the time 10 o'clock rolls around. Then 10:30 rolls around, you start checking some more emails, you start getting a little bit of hunger, and then 12 o'clock rolls around, and for the hour of 12 o'clock, you build no time because you're at lunch. You come back, and you've still got a little bit of the post-lunch lulls, and so you're not going to be too active. You're answering some emails, you're not billing for all of your time, and then statistics say that you're running at about 80% capacity in the afternoon. After morning session, if 100% is your baseline morning, your afternoon looks at about 80%. You're typically not running on all cylinders. After 5 o'clock, you're running at about, I think the number is actually less than 50%. So it's going to take you between 5 and 6. The work that you could get done between 5 and 6 is typically going to take you about 30 minutes at 8 o'clock. But what you'll generally see is there's a lot of white space. That's a whole lot of lost productivity. You're in the office, you're away from your family and friends, you're not getting to spend the time with your family that you want, or to generally do the other things that you want. You're not going to the movies, doing anything else. Working with a virtual assistant allows, this is just a scenario that I used to say that we have a virtual assistant that works about 3 hours away. Say, for instance, we're in Eastern time zone. This is somebody that's based in Oregon or California. They're 3 hours behind us. All this graph is this graph stacked on top of itself, shifted 3 hours, and then a slight cost of performance factored in. So you'll see this, the green area is the exact same. This is one of the amazing things that you'll see. Here, there's a big dip where absolutely nothing productive happens. That same dip still exists working with a VA, but it's much shallower. Because right as you're hitting your lunch break, they're hitting their most productive period of the day. So that's one way that you can do it. Now think about it. If you're billing per hours for this, and you're also figuring out a way to bill for your virtual assistant's time, you've just doubled or tripled your income. Because you've filled in a lot of the spaces, you've gotten more work done in less time, and you're actually able to get to some other projects that you didn't otherwise have. So say, for instance, you don't have an hourly rate. Your time is not valuable from a revenue standpoint in a direct correlation, but it could help for you to focus on some other things. In a traditional scenario, you would have your revenues and your expenses. As your revenues increase, any business owner will tell you that your revenues increase correspondingly. And surprisingly, that whole myth that they tell you in business school of economies of scale, this never happens. You'll quickly realize that your profit margins when you were early on were significantly higher than they are later on. It's just one of those weird things about running a business. So you like to think that you get economies of scale, but practically speaking, what this is you've added staff now, and now we need people to manage that staff. And the staff is increasingly, our human resources have increased. So while our component costs have actually decreased, our human resources costs have gone up. If you want perfect examples of this, look at the education industry. Long-standing school boards have tremendous bloat at administrative levels because as the larger that they get, the more administration they need. And administration is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It turns into a bureaucracy and not necessarily relating to the bottom line. So how does a virtual assistant help with this? Well, one of the benefits that I talked about before is none of these virtual assistants have any ongoing relationship. They don't work with you in your office. You don't have dedicated office space for them. You don't have to set them up on your healthcare plan. You can hire and fire at will. And many times you can simply adjust the package that you have available with them in order to make it more advantageous for you. So we have, in a real sense, scalability. So this is what happens if you have a situation where you're working with a virtual assistant. In this situation, you have the exact same revenues that are reflected here. These numbers are the exact same. But what I factored in here is a 50% cut in your human resources amount. And all we've done here is when April was up a little bit and it goes down in May, we cut back a little bit on our virtual assistant needs. When June got busy, we doubled. I think this actually reflects a tripling of our virtual assistant costs. And then when things slacked back off in July, we cut back. So for instance, in a situation like me, I don't typically bill out for my virtual assistant's time. I typically don't put them on confidential matters, and a lot of the stuff that they do is not billable. So it's a fixed cost for me. However, when I get slow, which is generally about third quarter of any year, I cut off my virtual assistant entirely. I don't need them. I can do most of the work myself. However, when I get busy in fourth quarter and then first quarter of the next year, I'm slammed and I typically need to bump up my package with my virtual assistant as much as double that I would normally have in, say, for instance, the summer when I'm on vacation a lot and I just need somebody to help with some administration. So in this situation, I can bump it up, but the hours that I'm spending is typically about $10 an hour flat. And this is me needing about 20 hours worth of work per month. So this, I'm paying $10 an hour. No taxes taken out. It's paid by credit card. It makes it incredibly easy for me to ramp up and then cut back entirely. So for instance, 2 months ago I canceled because I didn't need the work. This month I added back on, and without losing a beat, the guy that I had working for me 2 months ago is working for me again, and he knows how I work, and we're right back into it. So you actually have scalability. So say for instance you have a huge project that comes in June. Say for instance you're a very cyclical business and you need some help. Then you can add that in, and then when things taper off in July, you can cut it back. That's the benefit of working with a virtual assistant, is it's truly scalable. And because you're working at arm's length, typically that whole human element, you're typically going to be more likely to actually let them go as opposed to having that one person that's been working in the office for 20 years hanging around until you find something for them to do. Now, the entire picture with virtual assistants is not just rosy. I'm not going to say that it's a wonder cure for your business, that it's going to solve all your problems. There are serious concerns. The biggest of which, and I'm honest, this is my biggest issue. Virtual assistants are virtual. They are remote workers. They do not work in your office. They do not learn how you work. They do not catch up on sarcasm. They don't hang out at the water cooler. You don't build a repartee with these people. So the lack of physical presence hurts on the internal side, but it can also hurt on how they do this. If you need your laundry picked up, these guys can't help you. Many of them are based in India, many of them are based in Costa Rica. Even if they're based in the next county over, they're probably not going to want to drive in order to pick up your laundry and bring it by the office. So the lack of physical presence is typically the biggest issue for getting a virtual assistant. The second issue obviously, is confidentiality. If you don't have somebody in your office, you can't make sure that they're not running off with your files. This is an issue in some ways that is overinflated, and in some ways it's underinflated. I had an attorney one time that asked me, how can you justify sharing potentially confidential information with an attorney in India when many people have paper files and whatnot and they can lock their office? And so the very first question I asked them was, do you vacuum your own floors? Of course I don't vacuum my own floors. Well, who does it? Well, there's a guy that comes in after hours. Does that guy have a key to your office? Well, yeah. That's just as big of a confidentiality concern. Most people don't even think about it because they just aren't geared that way. The internet, now that we have it, is this wonderful magical box that we can put information into and get information out of, but a lot of people still don't understand it and they're afraid of it, but we fail to see that we still do things on a day-to-day basis that cause serious concerns with confidentiality. But this is obviously an area in which confidentiality can be a problem, especially if you're in a situation where you share your confidential information such as a credit card, a bank account number. You're sharing sensitive information that somebody can use to take advantage of you. Does that happen often? No. I cannot emphasize enough. I can count on one hand the total number of stories that I've heard, not just people that I've heard that I know personally, but literally forums that I've seen, reviews that I've seen, customer reviews where somebody has said, oh yeah, so-and-so ran off with my credit card and racked up $200,000 worth of expenses. I can literally count those on one hand. I can count on two hands the number of people in the Jefferson County area in the last 6 months that have run off with sometimes $200,000 worth of client trust funds from their own law firms. So confidentiality is an issue, but I don't see it being abnormally large. I think you're going to run into your same issues anywhere. The other side of it is that India specifically, and China is a whole different issue. China has no protections for confidentiality. Many of the Southeast Asian countries do not. But India specifically has become such a large outsourcing center that they have made it a crime, punishable by a severe penalty, to breach confidentiality when you have an expectation of confidentiality. In the United States, if you leak a trade secret, you typically have to show that it is a trade secret, that there was actual breach, that there were damages, and even then, most of the district attorneys will never prosecute a trade secret violation. In India, they're aggressive. They will go after people, and all you have to show is that you had a contract that said that this was supposed to be exchanged in a confidential manner. Now, I say that because India is one of the few exceptions. Most Southeast Asian countries have no expectation of privacy in that regard, and you might have a problem running into it. So make sure that you have a jurisdiction that recognizes confidentiality. Even if you're working with somebody that's in the same state, make sure that you have some level of protection on most of your items. I generally recommend a two-factor identification, a separate login for these individuals to come into so that if things get bad, you can cut off their access. Finally, consistency. Consistency is a concern with any virtual assistant because there's inevitably going to be turnover. You have somebody that works remotely, and like I said, you're not going to have the human element of just learning what people expect and how they work. You're just not going to learn the soft skills. So there is a problem with consistency. Even if you work with a dedicated virtual assistant, you're going to have some of them that they're very, very good at what they do, but you might get somebody else the next time you send in a task. Maybe that one person, for better or for worse, a lot of these virtual assistant firms, especially in the mid-range, they have a lot of turnover. So you might have a dedicated virtual assistant who's only there for 6 to 18 months, and then they're on to somewhere else. So you might have a problem with consistency from a recurring basis because there's nothing that dedicates you to be with Susan in Costa Rica or to Aaron in India. These guys might leave and you're still stuck with the company, and now you've got to learn with somebody else. But if you ask me, these are the big three concerns with virtual assistants. Some people are just completely petrified of them. That's fine. They'll get blown by people that can offer better services for less expensive rates. But these are the big concerns. And the big thing is that if you know your scope of where you need work, you can mitigate the lack of physical presence. If you know which jurisdiction you're dealing with and you have controls internally, you can mitigate confidentiality concerns. Consistency, that's just always going to be there. That's one of the biggest problems with VAs. So if you're willing to accept that, then that's part of it. But the first two can be mitigated. Finally, I'll open it up to questions. So,
okay, when you talk about